Modern-day technology is the result of hardworking and gifted inventors and innovators. Most of the things we take for granted are combinations of many different technologies, each of which took thousands of hours of work and many minds to create. But the source of innovation is not just great minds alone. Credit is also due to the environments that foster progress. Many great ideas are a happy accident that give birth to something unique, something that couldn't have come about if it weren't for a special set of circumstances that wouldn't have occurred anyplace else. In the case of virtual reality, we have to look back to the turn of the century to understand how this is responsible for something like this. In the next few minutes, we'll trace the history of 183 to 185 Water Street. We'll show you how each company that existed there built on the progress of its predecessor, contributing to the fields of audio, simulation, and computing, and making this location the birthplace of virtual reality.
I'm Megan DeVito, and I'm a researcher here at the Bundy Arts and Victorian Museum in Binghamton, New York. We have a house of Harlow Bundy, but he was not the inventor of the time clock. His brother Willard was the inventor. Willard was born in Otsego, New York, and he was a jeweler, tinkerer of all sorts, and he invented clocks as well. He had also begun to experiment with the idea of using time as a measurement of figuring out someone's pay, and had begun to work on these time recording clocks. What had happened is Harlow had gone into Willard's shop at one point, so the story goes, and he was being shown all of Willard's inventions, and while he was impressed by the 10,000-year-old clock, the 10,000-year clock, what really caught his eye were these beginnings of these time recording clocks. While Willard didn't think much of them, Harlow saw a business opportunity here. He had had experience with his workers and the inefficiency sometimes of the timekeeper, the human timekeeper, at his store, and he thought that this might be a device that not only he would want to use, but that other businesses would see as beneficial to them. So through Harlow's persuasion, Willard applied for patents, and they began the Bundy Manufacturing Company here in Binghamton in 1889 was when it was incorporated. When the Bundy Manufacturing Company started out, business was actually quite slow. They said that the first 100 time clocks were very difficult to sell to people because the idea of a time clock was hard to sell. Harlow would approach business owners and tell them of this clock, and they would think that they wouldn't need it because they had already a man who would record the time of the workers coming in and out. So Harlow not only had to convince them to let go one of their employees, but these time clocks were also very expensive. So Harlow tried to explain that yes, while it's expensive at first, you're going to be saving money in the long run, not only by having your employees' time being recorded more efficiently, but essentially that you wouldn't have to pay a salary for this time clock. This is an early example of a man's job being replaced by a machine. And by 1893, they had begun to outgrow this small little factory on Commercial Ave. That's when they acquired 183 to 185 Water Street. This building and its size allowed them to actually install their own machinery to make parts for their clocks and to manufacture the cases, the beautiful wooden cases that these clocks were being put in. As they continued to expand, 2 stories were added to this building, making it a 6-story manufacturing warehouse. And this made it the largest, and this made it the tallest manufacturing warehouse in Binghamton at the time. So with the continued success of the Bundy Manufacturing Company and ITR, they again began to outgrow their space at 183 to 185 Water Street. This is when Harlow began to look for another location and eventually found a place in Endicott. Now this caused a little bit of discontent among residents in Binghamton because they didn't want to see this growing and prospering business move to Endicott, but they ended up moving there anyway, and that's where it eventually became IBM under the direction of Thomas Watson did. A third type is the punch card, which works by a card kind of like an old voter's ballot, if you remember what those are like, that you insert and it literally punches out a little piece of the card for you then to store, and you use that to punch out then. That's probably the most common. When people think of a time clock, they think of that card punching in and out at the beginning and end of the day. It's amazing what holes in paper can tell someone.
Yeah. The next company to occupy 183 to 185 Water Street was the Automatic Music Company. Just as the name suggests, they made musical instruments that played themselves. The former time clock factory was an ideal space to construct these intricate machines. The devices that Automatic Music manufactured were essentially the stereos and the jukeboxes of the day. One of the major buyers of these devices were movie theaters. At the time, films were silent and musicians were responsible for providing the audio. Like time clocks, automatic music machines were meant to take over a job that people would otherwise do. In addition to supplying units to theaters, restaurants, and other establishments, the machines were marketed for home use as well. Having a player piano or a violana in one's own home was a luxury, and the novelty of this early robotic device, which was very modern for its time, made it more desirable than simply having someone who could sit at a piano and play. With the changing social trends of the early 1900s, young people were devoting less time to playing an instrument and spending more time out working and socializing. This created a market for these automatic music machines. Automatic music began at Water Street in 1907, but shortly after had financial troubles and went bankrupt in 1914. The business was bought by Ed Link, who worked in the music industry and saw an opportunity to continue the legacy of automatic music in the factory and take advantage of the still thriving market. Under the direction of Link, organs were added to the line of instruments manufactured. These machines were highly complicated and required multiple mechanisms to work together in synchronization. They are a close ancestor to virtual reality in that they were an early form of robotics, using mechanics to control motion. They also reproduced a sound, another element essential to simulation. Some of the actual components that went into these machines were also used in the first flight simulator. Ed Link Jr., the son of the owner of the Link Automatic Organ Company, worked in his father's factory building organs and coming up with new designs. Ed Link Jr. was interested in flying and took lessons at a local airport to become a pilot. At the time, flying lessons were very expensive, and Link thought there had to be a way to make them more affordable. He decided to build a flight simulator using his knowledge of electromechanical components and supplies from his father's factory. In 1929, the first Link flight simulator was patented.
My name is Stan Hayes. I went to work for Link in 1941, January, and worked as a draftsman to begin with, then in design, and then into project management. And I don't know any more than the story that's told about that one, and that is he noticed how it felt at one point sitting on some bellows and decided that this could feel like a flying aircraft. And apparently that was his druthers at the time. He wanted to do flying, and so he, with his imaginative, creative mind, he went ahead and put together something that would give movement using the vacuum system that's normal to a organ or a player piano even.
Borrowing from technology used in automatic organs, the simulator relied on a turbine to create vacuum force. Air was moved through the trainer with a series of valves routed to bellows, which expanded and deflated. This caused it to move in reaction to the pilot pushing and pulling on the joystick. Business was slow at first, and the only people who seemed interested in buying his device were theme parks who intended to use the simulator for amusement. To get his idea off the ground, Link decided to open his own aviation school at 183 to 185 Water Street. In addition to making organs, the factory was also making the simulators that came to be known as blue boxes, and teaching people to fly for as little as $85. In 1934, Link got his first big break when the job of airmail delivery was handed over to the Army Air Corps. The pilots, while experienced, were used to flying by their instincts, relying on visual cues and sensation while in the air. This presented a problem on days when the weather was less than ideal. Link's flight trainer would offer a way to safely teach these pilots to fly using only their instruments. The era of modern aviation began with the Blue Box flight trainer. Flight simulation has been essential for helping to take pilots to the sky, astronauts to the moon, and the 21st century into 3D virtual worlds. The tools of simulation have applied to many other fields, such as predicting the weather and modeling the economy. Simulation is one of the most significant breakthroughs of the 20th century, and its origins are firmly rooted in the computational, robotic, and motion control technologies advanced by the companies at 183 to 185 Water Street in Binghamton, New York.